An 80-year-old woman stood alone in an elegant restaurant on her birthday, turned away at the door. She had millions in the bank, but couldn't buy the one thing she desperately needed: someone to share a meal with. Then, a young father and his daughter did something unexpected that would change all their lives forever. Before we begin, if you believe in the power of second chances and acts of kindness, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. This story will touch your heart in ways you never expected. Now let's begin. The rain came down hard that November evening in Manhattan, turning the city streets into rivers of light and shadow. Inside the Sterling Room, one of the most exclusive restaurants in Midtown, the atmosphere was warm and alive with the sound of clinking glasses and soft laughter. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, casting a golden glow on the well-dressed diners who filled every table. But at the entrance, standing before the host's podium, 80-year-old Eleanor Whitmore felt completely invisible. She wore her finest navy velvet dress, the one she'd been saving for years. Around her neck hung the pearl necklace that had belonged to her mother, each pearl a small moon of memory. Her hands, covered in delicate gloves, gripped her handbag so tightly that her knuckles had gone white. She'd rehearsed this moment all week in her Park Avenue penthouse. She would walk in with her head held high, ask for a table for one, and celebrate the fact that she'd survived 80 years on this earth. But reality was far crueler than her imagination. The young host barely looked at her. His eyes stayed glued to his tablet screen as he spoke in that tone people use when they think an elderly person just doesn't understand how the modern world works. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but without a reservation, it's impossible to seat you tonight. We're completely booked." He said it for the third time now, each repetition cutting a little deeper. Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks, not from the cold rain outside, but from the burning shame of feeling like a burden. She glanced around the dining room. Couples were toasting to anniversaries. Groups of friends were laughing over shared plates. Families were celebrating together, their faces bright with joy. Everyone seemed to have a place in the world. Everyone belonged somewhere. Everyone except her. And here she stood, one of the wealthiest women in New York City, unable to buy the one thing she desperately needed tonight: company and a shred of dignity. Loneliness, she thought bitterly, is the only price money can't pay when your time is running out. Eleanor nodded slowly, swallowing the lump that was forming in her throat. She wouldn't make a scene. Her upbringing wouldn't allow it. Pride was all she had left. "I understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Thank you anyway." She turned toward the revolving door, toward the rain-soaked streets and the empty penthouse that waited for her like a tomb. Her legs felt heavy, each step an effort. She'd been foolish to think tonight would be different. She'd pushed everyone away over the years: her demanding nature, her cold business decisions, her belief that success mattered more than love. And now the bill had come due. Just as she reached for the door handle, ready to disappear into the November night, something stopped her. A child's laugh. It was pure and crystalline, cutting through the murmur of conversation like a beam of sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Eleanor paused, her hand frozen on the cold metal. That sound, so full of life and innocence, pulled at something deep inside her heart. She turned, almost against her will, searching for the source. At a round table near the rain-streaked windows sat a young man and a little girl. The man looked to be in his mid-30s, dressed in a worn corduroy jacket and a simple white shirt. No tie, no expensive watch, nothing that marked him as belonging to this place of privilege. But his face held something the other diners lacked: a quiet, genuine warmth. The little girl beside him couldn't have been more than 7 years old. Her hair was slightly messy, as if she'd been playing before dinner, and her eyes, those bright, curious eyes, sparkled with an intelligence far beyond her years. Both of them had stopped eating. The man held his fork in midair, but his attention was fixed on the entrance. On Eleanor. On the heartbreaking scene he'd just witnessed. There was no mockery in his gaze. No pity. No indifference. There was recognition. Empathy. The kind that only comes from knowing pain firsthand. The man set down his fork, wiped his mouth with his napkin, and looked at his daughter. The little girl nodded, her expression suddenly serious, as if they'd communicated an entire conversation without words. Eleanor's hand was still on the door when she felt it, that strange sixth sense that tells you when someone is watching. She glanced back, expecting to see the host, making sure she left quickly, not wanting her to spoil the restaurant's elegant atmosphere. But it wasn't the host. Her tired eyes met the young man's warm gaze across the crowded room. And then, slowly and deliberately, he raised his right hand and gestured to her. Not a wave goodbye. Not a dismissive flick of the wrist. He was beckoning her to come over. Eleanor frowned, confused. Did she know him? Impossible. She'd been a recluse for years, hidden away from public life after her son's death. Was he making fun of her? The paranoid voice in her head, the one that had grown louder with each lonely year, whispered that everyone was watching, that this was some cruel joke. But the man didn't look cruel. He stood up, which in itself felt like an act from another era, a gesture of respect that had all but disappeared from the world. He walked toward her, weaving carefully between tables, dodging a waiter carrying a tray of wine glasses. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said when he reached her. His voice was smooth and gentle, like warm honey. "My daughter and I couldn't help but notice what happened. This table we have is for 4 people, and there are only 2 of us. It would be an honor if you'd join us for dinner. It's raining too hard out there for you to leave without a proper meal." Eleanor stood frozen, her brain struggling to process what was happening. She searched his face for signs of deception, for hidden cameras, for some explanation that would make sense of such kindness in such a selfish world. But all she saw was sincerity in those dark eyes. I wouldn't want to intrude," Eleanor stammered, clutching her purse like a shield. "This is clearly a special dinner for you and your daughter. I don't want to impose. Besides, tonight is." She stopped herself before admitting it was her birthday. She didn't want pity. The man smiled, and that smile transformed his tired face into something luminous. "Actually, ma'am, it's precisely because it's a family dinner that we'd love to have you join us," he said softly. "We're missing a grandmother at our table. And my daughter Lily just told me you look like a princess from her storybook. You can't leave a princess standing in the rain, can you?" At the mention of the little girl, Eleanor felt something crack in the armor she'd built around her heart. She looked past the man to the table where Lily sat, and the child waved at her with such enthusiasm, such pure joy, that Eleanor felt tears prick at her eyes. When was the last time anyone had waved at her like that? When was the last time anyone had made her feel wanted? Eleanor blinked rapidly, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to ruin her carefully applied makeup. One tear would destroy everything. She took a hesitant step toward them. Then another. The host, watching from his podium with obvious disapproval, opened his mouth to protest. Surely there were rules about sharing tables with strangers. But the young man shot him a look so firm and unyielding that the words died on the host's lips. The man offered Eleanor his arm, just as a gentleman from a bygone era would have done. As she took it, Eleanor noticed the sleeve of his jacket was worn thin at the elbow, frayed from years of use. This was a man who worked hard for every dollar, which made his invitation even more precious. He didn't have money to spare, but he had heart to give. As they walked to the table together, Eleanor felt something she hadn't felt in decades: hope. Fragile and small, like the first green shoot pushing through winter snow, but hope nonetheless. When they reached the table, Lily practically bounced in her seat with excitement. "Hi," the little girl said, her voice bright as Christmas morning. "I really like your pearls." Eleanor couldn't help but smile, a real smile that took years off her face. "Thank you, sweetheart," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "They're very special to me." The man pulled out a chair for Eleanor with such natural grace that she felt, for the first time in years, like she mattered. As she settled into her seat and looked across the table at Lily's beaming face, something unsettling flickered at the edge of Eleanor's awareness. There was something about the shape of the child's eyes, the arch of her small eyebrows, the way she tilted her head when she smiled. It reminded Eleanor of someone she'd lost long ago. But that was impossible. Surely it was just her lonely heart seeing connections that weren't there, desperate for family in the face of a stranger's kindness. Eleanor pushed the thought away and reached for her water glass, her hand trembling slightly. "Thank you," she whispered to the man and his daughter. "Thank you for seeing me." And as the waiter approached their table and the rain continued to drum against the windows, Eleanor Whitmore had no idea that this simple act of kindness would unravel every secret she'd been hiding for 35 years. The dinner began with an awkwardness that slowly melted away like ice under warm sunlight. Eleanor sat stiffly at first, her back straight, her hands folded carefully in her lap. She wasn't used to casual conversation anymore. Years of board meetings and business negotiations had stripped away her ability to simply talk to people. But Lily made it impossible to stay guarded. The little girl chattered away about her day at school, her drawings of unicorns and rainbows, and her best friend who could do a cartwheel better than anyone else in second grade. Her enthusiasm was contagious, filling the space between them with warmth and light. Eleanor found herself actually laughing, a real, genuine laugh that came from somewhere deep inside, a place she thought had died years ago. She couldn't remember the last time she'd shared a meal with the sound of anything other than her own breathing or the background noise of television news. The man, he'd introduced himself as Caleb Rivers, watched the interaction with quiet satisfaction. He ordered Eleanor the lobster bisque without asking, somehow knowing it would be perfect for a cold November night. He was attentive but not intrusive, kind but not pitying. Eleanor studied him carefully between bites. There was a gentle strength about him, a dignity that no amount of wealth could buy. His hands were calloused, the hands of someone who worked with them every day. A carpenter, perhaps, or a craftsman of some kind. As the waiter cleared their soup bowls and brought the main course, Eleanor felt something shift inside her. She'd been carrying a secret all evening, a truth that felt too heavy to hold alone anymore. "You know," she said softly, setting down her fork and looking at the white tablecloth, "I don't usually go out alone. In fact, tonight is special." She paused, her heart hammering in her chest. Admitting this out loud felt terrifying, like exposing a wound that had never healed. "Today is my 80th birthday." The words came out barely above a whisper, but they landed like thunder. Lily gasped, her eyes going wide with delight. Her little hands, still sticky from the bread she'd been eating, came together in excited claps. "Daddy, it's a birthday. We have to sing." Caleb's face broke into a warm smile, and without hesitation, he raised his hand to signal the waiter. "Please bring us your finest dessert," he said, "and put a candle on it. We have something very important to celebrate here." Eleanor felt tears threatening again, but this time they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of gratitude so overwhelming she could barely breathe. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice trembling as she met Caleb's eyes. "You don't even know me. I could be a terrible person. I could be someone not worth your kindness." Caleb leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful and sincere. "Because no one should celebrate their birthday alone, ma'am," he said simply. "And because my mother always told me that a shared table tastes better than the finest meal eaten in solitude." The mention of his mother brought a fleeting shadow across Caleb's face, something sad and distant that passed as quickly as it came. But Eleanor caught it. Years of reading people in the cutthroat world of business had taught her to notice the smallest shifts in expression. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman," Eleanor said carefully, testing the waters. "She must be very proud of the man you've become." Caleb nodded slowly, taking a sip of water before answering. "She was wise," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She passed away a few months ago. Cancer. She fought it for 2 years, but in the end." He trailed off, looking at Lily, who had grown quieter, her small face serious. "I'm so sorry," Eleanor whispered, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. Caleb gave her a sad smile. "Thank you. She was an incredible woman. She raised me all by herself, worked 3 jobs sometimes, cleaning houses in the Hamptons, taking care of other people's children, scrubbing floors in mansions bigger than anything we could ever afford. Also, I could go to school, so I could have a better life than she did." Eleanor felt something cold settle in her stomach. The story felt familiar in a way that made her deeply uncomfortable. "And your father?" she asked, though part of her didn't want to know the answer. Caleb shook his head. "Never met him. My mother never wanted to talk about him much. All she ever said was that he came from a very different world than ours. Old money, high society, all that. She said he was a good man, but that his family—" He paused, choosing his words carefully in front of Lily. "His family didn't think she was good enough. When she told them she was pregnant, his mother gave her an envelope full of cash and told her to disappear. Told her she was trying to trap her son, trying to ruin their family name." Eleanor's hands began to shake beneath the table. The room suddenly felt too hot, the air too thick to breathe. "My mother left that same day," Caleb continued, his voice steady but filled with an old pain. "Never asked for anything else. She took that money, found a tiny apartment in Brooklyn, and raised me alone. She worked herself to the bone, so I'd never know poverty the way she did. And she never once spoke badly about my father or his family, even though they'd thrown her away like garbage." The words hit Eleanor like physical blows. Each sentence was a mirror held up to her own sins, reflecting back a cruelty she'd tried to bury for 35 years. "What was her name?" Eleanor asked, though her voice was barely audible now. Your mother. Grace, Caleb said, his eyes softening at the memory. Grace Rivers. The name detonated in Eleanor's mind like a bomb. Grace Rivers. The young, beautiful housekeeper who had worked in the Whitmore mansion in the Hamptons. The girl who had been so kind, so gentle, so full of life. The girl Eleanor's son Jonathan had fallen in love with during one summer when he was home from Yale. The girl Eleanor had destroyed. Eleanor remembered it all with crystal clarity now. Finding Grace in the kitchen, crying, telling Eleanor she was pregnant with Jonathan's child. Eleanor's rage, not at her son, but at this girl who dared to reach above her station. The envelope she'd shoved into Grace's trembling hands. The words she'd spat like venom. Take this money and disappear. If you ever try to contact my son again, I'll make sure you never work in this city again. Grace had left sobbing, and Eleanor had told Jonathan that the girl had taken the money and run, that she'd never really loved him, that she'd just wanted to trap a rich husband. Jonathan had been heartbroken, but eventually he'd moved on, married someone from their social circle. And then, 10 years ago, he died in a car accident on the Long Island Expressway, leaving Eleanor completely alone. All this time, Eleanor had mourned not having grandchildren, not having an heir to her empire. And all this time, her grandson had been here, in New York, struggling, surviving without her. Eleanor looked across the table at Caleb with fresh eyes, really seeing him for the first time. The shape of his jaw was identical to Jonathan's. The way he smiled, the way he tilted his head when he was thinking, it was all Jonathan. How had she not seen it immediately? And Lily, sweet, innocent Lily, had Jonathan's eyes. Her great-grandfather's eyes. Rivers, Eleanor repeated, her voice hollow. That's your last name? Yes, ma'am, Caleb said. Then his expression shifted to concern. Are you all right? You've gone very pale. Eleanor couldn't speak. The guilt was crushing her, making it impossible to breathe. She wanted to confess everything right there, to fall on her knees and beg forgiveness, to tell this kind, generous man that she was the monster from his mother's story. But fear paralyzed her. Fear of his reaction. Fear of losing this fragile connection. Fear of dying completely alone. The waiter arrived with a small chocolate cake, a single candle flickering on top. Lily clapped and began singing Happy Birthday in her sweet, off-key voice. Caleb joined in, his baritone voice warm and genuine. Other diners at nearby tables turned to watch, some even joining the song. Eleanor stared at the tiny flame, tears streaming down her face now, no longer caring about her makeup. She should have been happy. This should have been the best birthday of her life. But all she felt was the crushing weight of 35 years of lies. When the song ended, Caleb leaned forward. Make a wish, Eleanor. She closed her eyes and wished for the one thing money couldn't buy, redemption. Then she blew out the candle, and the small flame disappeared into a wisp of smoke. Caleb cut the cake and served Eleanor the biggest slice. As she took a bite, it tasted like ashes on her guilt-ridden tongue, but she forced herself to swallow. You mentioned you got a new job, Eleanor said, desperately trying to change the subject, to learn more about her grandson's life. What do you do, Caleb? His face brightened slightly. I'm a carpenter. Well, I was. I specialize in furniture restoration and custom woodwork, cabinets, staircases, that kind of thing. His expression dimmed. The workshop where I'd been working for 5 years closed down last month. Couldn't compete with the big chain furniture stores. My new job is actually on a construction site in Queens, doing general labor. It pays less and it's hard on my back, but... He glanced at Lily with such love that Eleanor's heart broke all over again. I need to save money. I want to open my own shop someday. I want Lily to have everything, a good education, opportunities, a better life than I had. Eleanor clutched her designer purse under the table. Here was her chance. Here was how she could begin to make things right. But she had to be careful. Caleb had pride, the same dignified pride his mother had possessed. If she offered him money directly, he would refuse. Caleb, she said slowly, pulling a small leather notebook from her bag. What an interesting coincidence. I own an old brownstone in Brooklyn that's been sitting empty for years. It needs extensive renovation. The library, the main staircase, custom built-ins. I need someone who understands real craftsmanship, not these modern contractors who just want to use cheap materials. She looked him directly in the eye. Would you be interested in taking a look at it? I'll pay a fair price, of course. Caleb's eyes widened in surprise and hope. Seriously? I mean, I don't have a full workshop set up yet. I'm working with pretty basic tools right now. Tools don't make the craftsman, Eleanor said firmly. It's the hands and the heart that matter. Write down your phone number for me. Caleb borrowed a pen from a passing waiter and wrote his number on a paper napkin. No business cards, no fancy contact information. Just a simple phone number written in neat, careful handwriting. He handed it to Eleanor like he was handing her a winning lottery ticket, not realizing she was the one who'd just won something priceless. When the check arrived, Eleanor reached for her wallet, but Caleb was faster. His hand came down firmly on the table. Don't even think about it, Eleanor. Today is your birthday, and you're our guest. I won't take no for an answer. But Caleb, this is an expensive restaurant. Eleanor tried to protest. Money comes and goes, ma'am, he said with that gentle smile. But memories? Those stay forever. Let me have this moment. Please. Eleanor watched in silence, a sharp pain piercing her chest, as Caleb pulled out a worn leather wallet and counted out crumpled bills. 20s, 10s, 5s, carefully calculating to cover the total and still leave a decent tip for the waiter. She saw him do the math in his head, probably subtracting this expense from his grocery budget for the week, maybe from Lily's school supplies fund. He was giving what he couldn't afford to give. And she, with her millions, her investment portfolios, her Park Avenue penthouse, had spent decades complaining about the temperature of her morning coffee while her own blood struggled just miles away. Eleanor realized in that moment what true wealth looked like. It wasn't in bank accounts or stock certificates. It was in the ability to give generously even when you had so little. It was in raising a daughter with love instead of nannies. It was in honoring your mother's memory by treating strangers with kindness. Grace Rivers, the poor housekeeper Eleanor had thrown away, had done a far better job raising a human being than Eleanor ever had with all her resources and advantages. The rain had stopped by the time they left the restaurant. The November air smelled clean and fresh, washed free of the city's usual grime. Well, Eleanor, Caleb said, extending his hand for a formal handshake, it's been an honor. Before Eleanor could respond, Lily ran forward and wrapped her small arms around Eleanor's legs in a tight hug. Happy birthday, Grandma Eleanor, the little girl shouted with pure joy. The word grandma nearly brought Eleanor to her knees. She crouched down with difficulty, her old bones protesting, and touched her great-granddaughter's soft cheek. Thank you, sweetheart, she whispered, fighting back sobs. That was the best gift I could have asked for. Just then, a sleek black town car pulled up to the curb. A uniformed driver stepped out quickly and opened the back door. Mrs. Whitmore, the driver said formally, my apologies for the delay. Eleanor saw Caleb and Lily's faces change, shock, confusion, and something that looked almost like betrayal. You have a private driver? Caleb asked, taking a small step back, suddenly seeing the gulf between them. Eleanor cursed herself for her usual display of wealth, but she recovered quickly. It's just a car service I use sometimes, she said, trying to downplay it. At my age, it's safer than driving myself. Caleb, please, call me tomorrow about the renovation project. I meant every word. She got into the car quickly, before she had to explain anything else, before the questions could start. As the car pulled away from the curb, Eleanor looked out the back window. Through the tinted glass, she could see Caleb and Lily standing under a streetlight, waving goodbye. Two small figures in a massive city. Her grandson, her great-granddaughter, her family. Eleanor leaned back against the leather seat, pulled out her phone, and dialed her attorney's private line, not caring that it was nearly midnight. Richard, she said when he answered, her voice filled with a determination she hadn't felt in years. I need you to prepare documents for the Brooklyn brownstone on Willow Street. And I want you to find the best woodworking equipment money can buy, industrial-grade, professional quality. We're starting a renovation project tomorrow. Tomorrow, her attorney sputtered. Eleanor, it's almost midnight. Tomorrow, she repeated firmly. And Richard, this is the most important project of my life. Don't let me down. She hung up and stared out the window at the lights of Manhattan blurring past. She had one chance to make this right. One chance to give her grandson the legacy he deserved without revealing the terrible truth of who she was. At least, not yet. Not until she'd proven she was worthy of forgiveness. The car turned onto Park Avenue, heading toward her empty penthouse, but for the first time in decades, Eleanor Whitmore didn't feel quite so alone. She had a family now. She just had to figure out how to keep them. The next morning, Caleb called the number written on the napkin, half expecting it to go to voicemail, or for the elegant old woman to have forgotten her promise in the light of day. But Eleanor answered on the first ring, her voice clear and eager. She gave him the address of a beautiful old brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, a property Eleanor had purchased years ago as an investment, but had left sitting empty, collecting dust and memories. When Caleb arrived in his aging pickup truck, tools rattling in the back, he found Eleanor waiting on the front steps. She dressed more simply today, slacks and a cardigan instead of velvet and pearls, trying not to intimidate him with her wealth. "Welcome, Caleb," she said, her hands trembling slightly as she unlocked the heavy oak door. "Please come in." As Caleb stepped inside, his breath caught in his throat. The entrance hall soared 2 stories high, with crown moldings that belonged in a museum. The staircase, oh, that staircase, was a masterpiece of carved oak, its banister dusty but magnificent, each spindle a work of art. This is incredible," Caleb whispered, running his calloused hand along the wood with the reverence of a man who understood craftsmanship. "This is original woodwork from the 1890s, isn't it?" Eleanor nodded, watching him with barely concealed affection. "Yes. It needs someone who understands its value. Someone who won't just cover it with paint or replace it with something modern and cheap. The job is yours if you want it," she continued. "But I have conditions. First, I want you to restore this wood as if it were for your own home, with all the care and love it deserves. Second, you'll need proper tools. I don't want you damaging this beautiful wood with equipment that's seen better days." Caleb's face fell slightly. He lowered his gaze to the dusty floor. "Ma'am, I appreciate the opportunity more than you know, but I can't afford to invest in new machinery right now. Between rent and Lily's expenses, and my mother's medical bills that I'm still paying off, I'm barely staying afloat as it is." Eleanor smiled, a knowing, grandmother's smile that held secrets and plans. "Don't worry about the initial investment," she said gently. "I'll advance you the money for equipment and materials. You provide the labor and the talent. Consider it a signing bonus. We'll deduct it from your final payment if you prefer. Does that work for you?" Caleb looked at her as if she'd just offered him the moon and stars. His eyes filled with tears, he quickly blinked away. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "You barely know me." "Because you're my grandson," Eleanor wanted to scream. "Because I owe your mother a debt I can never repay. Because I threw away 35 years I should have spent knowing you." But instead, she simply said, "Because I see potential in you, Caleb. And because everyone deserves a chance." The weeks that followed transformed Eleanor's life completely. She'd spent years attending meaningless board meetings and playing bridge with women she didn't even like. But now, every single day, she came to the brownstone. She brought a folding chair and a thermos of coffee, and she sat watching Caleb work. She watched him plane the wood with expert precision, measuring down to the millimeter, treating every piece with such respect and artistry that it confirmed what she already knew. Jonathan's creative blood ran through his veins. Sometimes Lily came after school, her backpack bouncing as she ran through the front door. She'd sit on the floor with her crayons and drawing paper, filling that old house with laughter and life and the sound of childhood that had been missing for far too long. Eleanor treasured those moments. She read stories to Lily, taught her how to play checkers, and subtly bought her new clothes and toys. Things Eleanor had saved from when Jonathan was a boy, stored away in cedar chests for grandchildren she thought she'd never have. She was building the memories she'd stolen from herself 35 years ago. Every afternoon with Lily was a small act of redemption. But keeping the secret grew harder each day. One afternoon, while they were sharing sandwiches during a lunch break, Caleb asked a question that made Eleanor's blood run cold. "Mrs. Eleanor," he said, wiping sawdust from his hands, "you mention your son a lot, the one who owned these toys you keep giving Lily. Where is he now? I never see him visiting you." Eleanor felt the lie stick in her throat like a fish bone. She stared at an empty space on the wall where a family portrait should have hung. "He's gone," she said quietly, her voice breaking. "He died 10 years ago. Car accident on the expressway. And before that, I made so many mistakes with him, Caleb. I was harsh and demanding. I thought success and reputation were the only things that mattered in life. I pushed him into a career he didn't want. I drove away people he loved because I didn't think they were good enough for our family name." Real tears streamed down her wrinkled cheeks. "I lost him long before he died," she whispered. "And I can never get that time back." Caleb, always empathetic, placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "We all make mistakes, Eleanor," he said softly. "My mother used to say that as long as we're still breathing, there's still time to make things right. Maybe wherever your son is now, he's forgiven you. Maybe he knows you're trying to be better. Eleanor had to bite her lip hard enough to taste blood to keep from screaming the truth at him. He's forgiven me because you exist. Because you're the best part of him, the part one tried to destroy. The renovation work was nearly complete. Under Caleb's expert hands, the brownstone had been transformed from a dusty ruin into a warm, beautiful home. The oak staircase gleamed like honey in the afternoon light. The library shelves were works of art. Every room breathed with new life. Eleanor carried in her purse a legal document she'd had her attorney prepare. The deed to the brownstone, ready to be transferred to Caleb Rivers as final payment for his services. It was an inheritance disguised as a work bonus. She knew it was risky. She knew Caleb would be suspicious of such generosity. But her health had been failing. Her doctor had warned her about her blood pressure, her heart, and the urgency to secure Lily and Caleb's future weighed more heavily than her fear of discovery. She felt ready to take the leap, to finally tell him the truth. She never imagined that fate would get there first. It was a stormy Thursday afternoon, eerily similar to the night they'd first met. Eleanor and Caleb were in the library, going over the final details of the custom bookshelves he'd built. Lily was playing on the rug with an antique music box Eleanor had given her, one that had belonged to Jonathan when he was a boy. Suddenly, Eleanor felt a wave of intense dizziness. The room tilted. Her vision blurred. She stumbled forward, grabbing the edge of a table for support. Her purse fell from her shoulder and hit the polished wooden floor with a heavy thud. The contents scattered everywhere. Her keys, her coin purse, her pills, and an old leather wallet that popped open when it struck the ground. Eleanor! Caleb rushed to her side, his strong hands steadying her. Are you okay? Should I call 911? No, she managed, trying to catch her breath, her heart racing dangerously. Just a dizzy spell. Old age catching up with me. I'll be fine. While Caleb helped her into a chair and went to get her a glass of water, little Lily, always helpful, always sweet, started gathering the items from the floor. I'll help you, Grandma Eleanor, she said in her earnest little voice. She picked up the lipstick, the keys, the pill bottles. Then she reached for the open wallet, and as she lifted it, a photograph slid out from a hidden compartment inside. It was an old black and white photo, worn at the edges from years of being touched, kissed, cried over. It showed a handsome young man, maybe 20 years old, standing in front of a sports car with a carefree smile on his face. He wore an expensive suit and an expression of youthful confidence. Lily stared at the photograph, her small brow furrowing in confusion. When Caleb returned with the water, Lily held up the photo. Daddy, look. This man has the same face as you, but he's wearing fancy clothes. Is this you when you were young? Caleb smiled at his daughter's innocent mistake as he took the photo. No, sweetheart, I never had clothes like. The smile froze on his face. The glass of water trembled in his hand. He stared at the image, and Eleanor watched the color drain from his face as he saw what Lily had seen, the unmistakable resemblance. The same strong jaw, the same shaped eyes, the same slight cleft in the chin, the same way the hair fell across the forehead. It was like looking in a mirror that showed the past. With shaking hands, Caleb turned the photograph over. On the back, in elegant, old-fashioned handwriting, were the words, Jonathan, Harvard graduation, 1989. My beloved son. Jonathan. The name echoed in Caleb's mind like a bell tolling in an empty church. His mother, in her final days when the cancer had ravaged her body and the morphine had loosened her tongue, had whispered that name with a mixture of love and infinite pain. Jonathan, she'd said through her tears. Tell Jonathan I never stopped loving him. Tell him it wasn't his fault. Tell him his mother, that horrible woman, she lied to him about me. But tell him I forgave him anyway. Jonathan, Caleb whispered now, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. He looked up slowly, and Eleanor saw the warmth and trust that had lived in his dark eyes transform into confusion, then comprehension, then cold, terrible understanding. Who is this man? Caleb asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Tell me the truth, Eleanor. Why do you have a photo of a man named Jonathan who looks exactly like me? Why did you really approach us at that restaurant? This wasn't a coincidence, was it? Eleanor tried to stand, tried to reach for him, but her legs wouldn't support her. The room spun. Caleb, please let me explain, she began, her voice desperate. Explain what? Caleb's voice rose, making Lily flinch and move behind her father's legs. My mother told me about a Jonathan. She told me he was a good man who loved her, but that his family, his mother, was cruel and cold. She told me that a rich woman named Eleanor destroyed her life, threw her out with nothing when she was pregnant with me. His eyes widened with horrified recognition. Eleanor Whitmore. You're not just any Eleanor. You're the Eleanor Whitmore. The manufacturing heiress. The woman from my mother's story. The one who called her trash. The one who said she was trying to trap your son for his money. Caleb took a step back, as if Eleanor were suddenly toxic. You knew, he said, his voice breaking. You knew who I was at that restaurant. You've been playing some kind of game with us, haven't you? Easing your guilty conscience by playing fairy godmother. Yes, Eleanor confessed, unable to lie anymore. The truth came pouring out like water from a broken dam. Yes, it's me. I'm the one who committed that terrible sin, Caleb. I'm the one who threw your mother out. I'm the one who told Jonathan she'd taken the money and run, that she'd never really loved him. I destroyed both their lives because of my pride and my prejudice. She was sobbing now, tears streaming down her face. Jonathan died never knowing about you, never knowing he had a son. When I saw you at that restaurant, I saw his eyes. I saw my blood. I saw my second chance. I just wanted to repair the damage. I wanted to give you what is rightfully yours. Eleanor pulled the envelope with the deed from her purse with trembling hands and placed it on the table. This house is yours, Caleb. It belongs to you and to Lily. It's my way of asking for forgiveness for the unforgivable. Caleb looked at the envelope like it contained a snake. His breathing was heavy. His hands clenched into fists. His face was red with anger and pain and betrayal. You think you can buy me? He shouted, his voice echoing through the empty brownstone. You think some property can erase what you did? Do you have any idea what my mother went through? The nights we went hungry? The times she worked herself sick because you decided we weren't good enough for your precious family name. He picked up Lily, holding her protectively against his chest. She died young, Eleanor. Worn out and broken. She died working as a housekeeper in someone else's mansion because you destroyed any chance she had for a better life. And now, because you're old and lonely and scared of dying alone, you think you can just swoop in and play the loving grandmother. Caleb's voice cracked with emotion. Well, I don't want your house. I don't want your money. And I definitely don't want your last name. Caleb, please. Eleanor struggled to stand, reaching out a desperate hand toward him. You're my grandson. Lily is my great-granddaughter. You're all I have left in this world. No, Caleb interrupted, his voice like ice. You have nothing. You have money. You have property. You have investments and bank accounts and a chauffeur. But family? You don't have family, Eleanor. Because family takes care of each other. Family doesn't throw each other away like garbage. He walked toward the door, each step deliberate and final. He paused at the threshold and turned back one last time. Keep your restored mansion, he said quietly. We're going back to our little apartment in Queens, where at least we can sleep at night with a clear conscience. The door slammed shut with a sound that echoed like a gunshot through the empty brownstone. And Eleanor Whitmore was left alone, surrounded by the beautiful work her grandson had created, drowning in the deafening silence that followed. She collapsed into a chair, feeling every one of her 80 years crushing down on her at once. For the first time in her life, her wealth was completely worthless. She had tried to buy Caleb's affection the same way she'd buy a stock or a piece of real estate, and she had failed spectacularly. That night, Eleanor didn't call her driver. She sat in the dark brownstone, staring at the wood Caleb had polished with such love and care, finally understanding that the restoration her family needed wasn't for furniture or staircases. It was for souls. And forgiveness wasn't something that could be signed over in front of a notary. It had to be earned with humility, with time, with genuine change. 3 things she had never been willing to offer before. 2 weeks passed. Caleb didn't return. The brownstone sat silent and empty, a beautiful shell without a heart. Eleanor took to her bed, not from physical illness, but from a grief so deep it drained her will to live. Her attorney suggested legal action, forcing Caleb to complete the contract, suing for breach of agreement. Eleanor screamed at him to leave and never come back. No one touches my grandson, she shouted, surprising herself with the fierce protectiveness in her voice. In her solitude, Eleanor did something she hadn't done in decades. She picked up a pen and paper, not to write a check, but to write a letter. A long letter, stained with tears, where she made no excuses. She stripped her soul bare on those pages. She told Caleb about the fear she'd felt when Jonathan fell in love with Grace, about how her own insecurity and childhood trauma had made her believe that only people from the right families could be trusted. She admitted that her arrogance had been armor, a way to hide how terrified she was of losing control, of being vulnerable, of letting love in. And for the first time in her life, she wrote the words, "Grace was a better woman than I ever was because she knew how to love without conditions. She knew how to give without keeping score. She raised you to be everything I failed to raise in my own son." Eleanor went personally to Caleb's apartment in Queens. She didn't bring her driver. She took the subway for the first time in 40 years, clutching the railing with her arthritic hands. She walked the final 3 blocks carrying an old wooden toolbox that had belonged to Jonathan when he was a boy learning woodworking as a hobby. Inside the box was the letter. She left both items in front of Caleb's apartment door, rang the bell, and then hid around the corner of the hallway. She didn't have the courage to face him. Not yet. Through a crack in the stairwell, she watched Caleb open the door. Watched him see the toolbox. Watched him pick up the letter with suspicious hands. Then Eleanor left, her heart pounding, not knowing if she'd just said goodbye forever or opened a door to forgiveness. That evening, Caleb sat at his small kitchen table and read Eleanor's letter. The words cut deep, each sentence a raw admission of failure, of regret, of desperate hope. As he read, tears fell onto the pages, smudging the ink. Lily, who missed the grandmother from their brief time together, climbed into her father's lap. "Daddy, why are you crying? Is Grandma Eleanor bad?" Caleb looked at his daughter, then at the toolbox that had belonged to his father, a father he'd never known. Inside was a note in Eleanor's handwriting. "These were your father's. He wanted to be a woodworker like you. I forced him to study business instead. I made him give up his dreams for mine. Don't let me make the same mistake with you. Build your own life, Caleb. With or without me. But please be happy. That's all I want now, for you to be happy." Caleb remembered his mother's dying words. "Resentment is poison, baby. Don't let it kill you like it almost killed me. Forgive. Always forgive. It's the only way to be free." He realized that if he held on to this hate, if he let Eleanor's past sins destroy his future, he would be continuing the cycle of pain his mother had worked so hard to break. Forgiving Eleanor didn't mean forgetting what she'd done. It didn't mean pretending the past didn't hurt. It meant choosing freedom over chains. It meant choosing peace over anger. It meant giving his daughter a grandmother and giving himself a family, even if that family was broken and imperfect. The next morning, Eleanor was at the brownstone, signing papers to put it on the market. There was no point keeping it anymore. The dream was dead. Suddenly, she heard footsteps at the entrance. Firm footsteps followed by smaller, running ones. She turned around, her heart in her throat. There stood Caleb in his work clothes, tools in hand. And Lily, who broke free and ran straight to Eleanor, wrapping her small arms around the old woman's waist. Eleanor broke down completely, holding her great-granddaughter like a drowning person holds a life raft. Caleb stood in the doorway, his expression serious but calm. "I don't want the house as a gift, Eleanor," he said firmly. "But I accept the job. I'll finish the restoration, and I'll charge you a fair rate for my work. And you," he paused, his voice softening slightly, "you can come have dinner with us on Sundays. Not as the owner of the property. Not as the wealthy benefactor. But as Grandma. We'll start there. Slowly. One day at a time." Eleanor nodded, unable to speak, accepting her grandson's conditions with a humility she'd never known before. It was slow. It was painful. But it was real. Caleb finished the brownstone, which became his workshop and showroom. But he insisted on paying Eleanor rent, symbolic at first, then more substantial as his business grew, until he could legitimately buy it with his own earnings. Eleanor learned to respect boundaries. She stopped trying to control Caleb with money. Instead, she earned his trust by simply showing up. By taking care of Lily when she had a cold. By attempting to cook Sunday dinners, and failing hilariously, much to Lily's delight. By listening to stories about Grace without judgment, honoring the memory of the woman she'd wronged. Over time, the wound became a scar, still visible, still a reminder, but no longer bleeding. Eleanor used her fortune to create the Grace Rivers Foundation, dedicated to helping single mothers with limited resources. It offered job training, childcare assistance, and housing support. She named it publicly after the woman she'd once destroyed, a permanent public acknowledgement of her past sins and her commitment to change. She even partnered with local trade schools to offer woodworking apprenticeships, ensuring that craftsmen like Caleb would have opportunities to thrive. The day Rivers Woodworking officially opened, Eleanor stood beside Caleb and Lily as they cut the ribbon. There was no press. No high society guests. Just the three of them and a few neighbors who'd watched the transformation of both the brownstone and the family inside it. On the wall of the workshop hung two photographs. One of Jonathan, young and smiling, and one of Grace, beautiful and kind, watching over the space, blessing it with their presence. Eleanor lived to see Lily graduate from elementary school with honors. She lived to see Caleb become one of Brooklyn's most sought-after custom woodworkers. She lived to see Sunday dinners become a sacred tradition, filled with laughter and sometimes tears and always, always love. She passed away peacefully on a Sunday afternoon in spring, holding Caleb's hand, with Lily reading her a story. Her last words were, "Thank you for letting me be your grandmother. It was the greatest privilege of my life." At her funeral, there were no empty speeches from business associates who barely knew her. No politicians looking for photo opportunities. Just Caleb, standing before her grave in a small cemetery in Brooklyn, holding Lily's hand. "My grandmother wasn't perfect," he said, his voice steady and clear. "She made unforgivable mistakes. She hurt people I loved. She destroyed lives because of pride and fear. But she had the courage to spend her final years trying to make amends. She didn't die as the owner of an empire or as a wealthy socialite." He paused, tears streaming down his face. "She died as our grandma, as Lily's grandma. And in the end, that's the only thing that really matters." This story teaches us that it's never too late to choose a different path. But it also reminds us that forgiveness isn't a blank check. It's daily work, like the careful restoration of old wood. It requires patience, effort, humility, and love. Eleanor Whitmore found her seat at the table of life not through her wealth or power, but through the kindness of the person she least expected, the grandson she'd wronged before he was even born. And that single act of compassion at a restaurant on a rainy November night saved her from dying in the loneliness she'd created for herself. Sometimes the stranger you invite to sit with you, the person you choose to see when everyone else looks away, that person might just be the angel your life has been waiting for. If this story of redemption, forgiveness, and second chances moved you, please subscribe to our channel. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to change, never too late to ask for forgiveness, and never too late to choose love over pride. Remember, kindness costs nothing, but its value is priceless. The smallest gesture can change a life forever. Until the next story, keep spreading kindness. The world needs it now more than ever.